Hello everyone, it's that time of the split again, the power rankings. This split I wanted to take a look at the playoff teams right before they go at it. In this video we will be ranking the 6 playoff teams among themselves while talking about their most notable strengths and weaknesses and edges over the other playoff teams. Let's get right into it, starting with the 6th best team in LEC, SK Gaming. The bottom 3 was a pretty hard call, but finally I went with SK in the last place. They should have a good matchup into Sharky though, at least draft wise, as Sharky's only successful style this split was to play towards SK's strengths. With that said though, I feel like Sharky is the better team at this point. SK's strength. Crown Shot. When Crown Shot is being played around, which is always with this card at SK, the team seems so clean after the 15th minute. Crown Shot seems like a very smart player that knows how to lead his team around his win conditions. You can think he's one of the best or just a mediocre AD carry, but from looking at the games, listening to the interviews and listening to the small sample size of comms we have, we can tell that this guy knows how to lead his team around himself and reliably carry them to victories after they set him up. Secondly, we have Zazie. A lot of the remaining teams are playing through their mid laner, whether it's G2 that free up caps to dominate the map, Rogue that gives Larsen everything he needs to carry the game after the 20th minute, or even Sharky that had subbed in Abe Faker for the last part of the split. Those teams, which are the majority of the playoff teams left, have a much easier time when their mid laner can play his game. Shutting down the mid laner or locking him in lane will be one of the most important things for the early game in a series versus those teams. Zazie wasn't a carry player this year by any means, but this guy knows how to survive a lane and force the enemy mid laner to stay in inconvenient timings with next to no jungle presence. He is accurate and he plays the lane correctly, which will be key in the up and coming series. And now for SK's weaknesses. While Crownshot is a great carry player, he is the only carry on this team. They did not play through Zazie at all, putting him solely on mages and Galio this split. Genex only played weak side. They are always trying to put Crownshot in a position to carry. If they can't, they lose. It's as simple as that. Secondly, I was going to talk about how SK's early game is pretty inactive and that they can practically only stall, but I've decided to go for the root cause instead of the symptom. Trick is the absolute worst jungler in playoffs. His champion pool is limited to the tanks, as he only had 4 carry champ games, 2 on Kha'Zix, 1 on Nocturne and 1 on Lee Sin, with a single victory. The rest of his games were on tanks that filled a specific role. He has the lowest kill participation from all of the junglers, and the lowest amount of first blood participation. He is one of the main reasons SK's early game looks the way it does, and it will hurt them a lot in playoffs. The 5th best team in this playoff bracket is Schalke. The ranking of Schalke and the 4th best team was really hard, but I decided to go with them here because I think they have a particular player that will have a hard time playing against his counterparts in these playoffs, which gave the other team the edge over them. Strengths. Schalke is the best absolute drafting team in LEC right now, in best of ones of course. What I mean by that is that they always find a way to have advantages in the late game teamfights while not giving up mid game power spikes that let them secure drakes and fight from certain points. They also always know their comp's win conditions and exactly how to play around them. Secondly, at least in the last 8 games, Schalke has really stable laners. They almost never lose lane relatively to the matchup of course, while at least one lane Abe Faker is winning. They use the singular lane advantage to later on get the neutral fights they set up so well to get things rolling and win the games. They couldn't have done that if one of their lanes would get equally stomped. And now for their weaknesses. Schalke has no playbook depth, or at least they haven't showed it. In all of the games in their win streak, except for the one vs OG, they had a clear late game win condition which they've used to win fights later on and close out the game. If a good team manages to get a better scaling comp versus them, which they should be able to do at least from red side in a best of 5, Schalke will have to show us things we didn't see at all in the regular split. Secondly, Gilios. I know it sounds crazy in comparison to what's going on social media, but compared to Shadow, Yanko, Selfmade and Inspired, Gilios will be an issue in those playoffs matches. Just take a look at those early games they've played versus those teams. The other jungler found the early game edge until a good team play or a smite fight had turned the tides in favor of Gilios. He still has that problem of playing away from his win conditions sometimes, making some bad judgment calls with his ganks. For example, ganking when he can be counter-ganked, ganking for a Shen with a Sejuani versus a Mordekaiser. Those problems will probably be exploited by those 4 powerhouses and will hurt Schalke's stable early game a lot. For the 4th best team, we have Fnatic. They were very up and down this split, and I've talked about them a lot in the last episode of What Did We See in the LEC, so I'll keep this relatively short. Strengths. Selfmade is the only jungler in playoffs that showed personal success in every single meta style. He is great on carries, great on tanks, great on farmers, great on those that look to skirmish around objectives. There's nothing this guy can't play as opposed to the other junglers, who each has his own limitations. He is even the best, most efficient farmer in the league, keeping himself with a gigantic amount of camps relatively to his playstyle and matchup in a specific game. If Fnatic can learn to play around him and for their waves a bit better, Buipo Nemesis, it could grant them major advantages. Secondly, Fnatic is a very good teamfighting team. Although this stale meta doesn't allow for a lot of comebacks, Fnatic have shown their ability to teamfight their way out of deficits and not just versus misfits. When they come into a fight, without completely trolling the early game, they know how they need to set it up and usually make their opponents heavily sweat for their fights. Lastly, and in relatedness to the last segment, Fnatic still has the best and most reliable AD carry in the league. He is still the same reckless, really good on his picks, the best wave manager in the league, with a really important meta champion he doesn't play, Caitlyn. Fnatic needs to play around this guy in his lane and he will deliver. Weaknesses. Nemesis. His form was discussed everywhere, but this is the absolute worst split of his career. He manages to hold the lane only on his mages, and it completely hurts Fnatic's early game. For more information, go watch What Did We See in the LEC episode 5, which I'll link in the description below. Secondly, Healy's champion pool is very lacking. Again, this was discussed a lot on every other media form, but he can only play the engaged champs. He never showed us the mages except for the Yuumi, and he tends to int on the defensive Tahm Kench and Braum. Fnatic seem to have learned to draft for his strengths, and instantly look at least a bit better in the last games of the season. They should keep playing towards his strengths, as I feel like he is already a known quantity. He won't change, but he has a lot to offer. Just play around him and Fnatic should be fine. Lastly, Fnatic didn't find their identity yet. They tried a gigantic variety of strats this split, in the most stale macro meta that ever was in competitive League of Legends. Not sticking to their guns had cost them a lot, making them a mediocre team. I really hope they found their style in those 2 weeks break. In the third place, I think pretty surprisingly I have put Mad Lions. After starting the split as the best team in the league, Mad fell off pretty hard. When everyone started catching up to the meta, they have started slowing down, showing some major weaknesses and holes in their gameplay, which were exploited by their enemies. Strength. Mad has the best jungler in the league. His early hovers are amazing, and they grant Mad an advantage in almost every game. He knows which fights he can take and exactly where the enemy jungler is, and he always counters well while staying even or ahead in CS. Shadow was without a doubt the best jungler in Europe this regular split. Even when Mad fell apart, he kept his form, doing everything he can to help his team get out of the laning phase in good positions. The only criticisms I have on this guy is that he doesn't play carry junglers and that he barely dives bot, but both of those could be attributed to the team's style. Secondly, Mad challenge for every neutral objective and they do it well, at least in the early games. Even with a deficit, they usually know how to set up a good fight for themselves and get good things from it, especially when the enemies don't expect a contest like in a 4v5 situation. They understand how they can win some very difficult fights, and even after putting themselves in a tough position, they can still salvage it and get the fight in the objective. Weaknesses. In the later stages of the season, Matt tried to play acceleration comps with champions like LeBlanc, Kalista, Volley, Mordekaiser, but they couldn't really pull it off, even when the enemies gave them the chance. They barely go for early game tower dives, and they never managed to get big enough leads to win the games with neutral setups alone. Furthermore, funnily enough, they are vulnerable to one of their main strengths. They can be way too cocky trying to secure neutral objective after securing a small victory such as a pick or river control while sending their laners back to farm. They lose many neutrals for this. Secondly, Matt doesn't play around Karzi, maybe also because of his bad form. While considering the fact Orome is being left to the weak side after the first and second clear of every game, this is a very worrying trend. Here are some of Karzi's stats from the split. Karzi has a minus 13 CS at 15, minus 250 gold at 15, and minus 160 XP at 15. In a team that usually wins the early game with a plus 152 gold on average and 72% of first towers. And all of that in a bot lane centric meta. Those deficits come from a few reasons, but in my opinion it's mainly the early rotations for Herald that Mad are always initiating super early, and the fact that Humanoid is usually the one getting the Herald and the plates. In the second place, as the second best team in EU, we have Rogue. This team is phenomenal at what it does. While the rest of the teams had ups and downs, Rogue was consistent throughout the entire split, slowly getting better at their own style. The players make sure Larsen can play the game, Larsen makes sure he has advantages, and Pryo going into every neutral fight and silent play, getting Handsome ahead and then winning the game through those two carries. For Rogue's strengths, we have their ability to play the standard metagame of scaling and playing for Drakes. They are the absolute best at that in Europe. Their only real contestant for this style in the second half of the split is Sharky, that also plays similarly. They don't fight fights they don't need to or can take, and instead they use this time and tempo to assign their players to the right places to get huge gold advantages, even on late game comps, so they could win the fights as early as possible. Their average gold difference at 15 is the highest in the league with plus 1298 gold. Secondly, Rogue is the best team in the league playing around the mid lane in the early game and securing his safety. Vander and Inspired make sure Larsen can play his game, which grants him and the rest a lot of peace and quiet to scale to desired points and get their interesting trades around the map. With those two simple tricks, Rogue have managed to convincingly win 13 games this split, and they just got better as it went on. Weaknesses. As opposed to most analysts, I'm not so sure Rogue limited playstyle is a major weakness. When you have a style that is the best in the meta and you keep refining it, you will probably win most of your games. The burden is on the other teams to find a solution for this, and I think the only one that had really done it so far is G2, but we'll talk about them later. Anyways, Rogue's first weakness is Finn. Probably the top laner that showed the least out of all the 6, playing only weak side and mostly simple and meta champions like GP, Ornn and Renekton with 14 out of his 18 games. While he and his team have success with the top lane style of play, it's still a bit exploitable. Finn also makes a lot of wave management mistakes, which sometimes put him behind or even giving his opponents openings for tower dives. A meta curveball I can already see teams taking a shot at versus Rogue is playing a carry top lane and snowballing the early game through top. If he goes for his first pick Renekton for example, there could be a terrifying Jax on the other side. This is a weakness I would like to see teams with a good carry top laner like Fnatic and G2 and even Sharky try to exploit. Secondly, Hansama played 10 games of Aphelios this split. He did not play Kate or Ashe, which are coming up as major priority picks. He also played Jhin once and it looked awful. He does not play Kate, and for what we've seen, he does not play the answers to her. Rogue might have to permaban Kate in playoffs, which will handicap their draft a lot. Teams with stylistic and champion pool depth, like G2 and Mad Lions, should be able to exploit this fact while getting another free OP pick. And for the current best team in EU, we have TSM. Just kidding, it's G2 of course. Their 6-game win streak, where they have been looking slightly better in each and every one of their games, went completely unnoticed. They are still ramping up, with Wander looking like a monster in those late games, reminding us what he can do when he slows down with his raids, at least according to interviews. Caps have been a rock for the entire split, and with those two solo laners, it's hard to imagine G2 not taking everything. Now, for their strengths. G2, as usual, is the most creative and diverse team in playoffs. Even in a stale meta like this, which really dumps down the game, G2 still found a way to effectively trade objectives around the map and play through a gigantic tempo advantage they create. They are the only team in Europe that can play and successfully snowball an early game comp, with champions such as LeBlanc, Mordekaiser, Caitlyn, Morgana, Kalista. They are definitely the scariest team in the league when it comes to their understanding of the meta and how to exploit it. Secondly, G2 has by far the best top laner in playoffs. Wander flipped his switch and he is again stomping everyone. His only competition in the league is at the 10th place right now, so that's not an issue. In their last 6 games, Wander had been given counter picks and he always delivers. Whether it's on the Camille, Mordekaiser, Cho'Gath or the Jax, this guy seems unstoppable. It would be really interesting to see how teams will approach this guy. Rogue's lane swap was an interesting attempt that might work with a bit more finesse. And now for their weaknesses. Firstly, G2 can't seem to successfully play around their jungler. They barely even tried playing hard for the jungle matchup, and when they did, it looked meh. Jankos is playing for his laners, and in a meta like this, I would like to see them at least try and give him the reins to carry through the jungle with picks such as Graves, Kha'Zix or even Lilia and Nidalee. Secondly, perks. He had a rough split for sure, not being the genius innovative AD carry he was in 2019. The champion pool, which allows for less outplay potential, is certainly a part of that, but he also seems a bit off mechanically. He is making a lot of lane mistakes, which Mickey has to try and fix, and he even gets caught in important mid-game situations by playing over-aggressively, like in their game versus Mad Lions. His Kalista looks insane, his Jhin is decent, but that's it. G2 doesn't know when to pick Aphelios, Perks' Ezreal seems lacking all of a sudden, his Caitlyn laning phase is very exploitable. He is going to play some of the best bot lane duos probably in the entire world. He has to step up his game to not be a burden on his team. If he can even get his form back, I can't see anyone stopping G2 from winning the playoffs. Well, that's it. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Let me know what you've thought of the list in the comments below. And as always, I'll see you in 2 weeks for a pre-game of the finals week of LEC.